This summer has been a busy one for us, and I have had some things on my to-do list for quite a while that just keep getting put off because they are not that emergent. But I had some stuff in the freezer that I needed to get cleared out, as well as some other tasks that I just needed to get to that keep getting put off. So I dedicated this past weekend to just getting some things done. Now, we raise our own chickens for meat as well as pigs here on our property, and I had some fat that I needed to get rendered. We do have lard already rendered, ready to go, but I needed to make some more space in the freezer. So I pulled out the rest of the fat that we had from last year's pigs to get rendered down so that we can clear up some space in there for produce from the garden. Now, there are many ways that you can render lard. I typically will do this on the stovetop in a large pot or in a roaster pan, but I knew that I was going to need that for some other stuff that I need to get done this weekend. So I'm doing this in the crock pot just over low heat. I like to trim off any meat that might be on the fat. That's just gonna help give you a cleaner flavor. You can also do a wet render where you're adding water to this. You will get an even more clean flavor doing it that way. However, I like to do it without. I find it just a little bit easier. You don't need to worry about getting all the water out. And for how I typically will use lard, I don't mind if it has a little bit of a flavor to it. So got the crock pot filled, and I'm just gonna leave that over low heat to do its thing for several hours. My spice drawer has turned into just a complete tragedy, honestly. I store all of my spices in half-pint mason jars, and this works really well for me. I just use my label maker to label them, and then I can keep them in alphabetical order, in theory. Usually I'm pretty good about that, but it has just gotten torn apart and everything is out of order. There's a lot that needs to be restocked, and this drawer also just needs to be cleaned up. So that is something that I've been meaning to do for quite a while. And one of the reasons I wanted to get to this is because I really need to put in a bulk food order. I like to order from Organic Matters. In the States, it would be Essential Organic Ingredients, and so I wanted to go through all of my spices because I do tend to order some from there as well, just to make sure that I could add that to the order. This drawer had tons of spilled herbs and spices, so pulled all of that out, and I'm just kind of taking stock of what we have, what needs to be restocked from our canning pantry. That's where I keep all of my overstock, and then this gave me the opportunity to completely reorganize it and get it back into alphabetical order so I can find what I'm looking for a lot easier. I really wish I wasn't this way, but when life gets busy, I definitely tend to just kind of shove things back in there, and it just makes things a lot more difficult than they need to be. So this was one of those things that I have just been putting off for quite a while, and it felt really good to get it done. Another task that I need to get dealt with this weekend is canning some chicken broth. We raise our own meat birds, we always have a ton of bones, and I needed to get some cleared out from the freezer. So I'm just roasting those to get a little bit more flavor with this broth, and once that's done, we'll get it onto the stove with some other ingredients. At this point, the fat had been rendering for several hours. Now, I do find that my crock pot tends to run a little bit on the warm side. I did a couple batches over this weekend, and I definitely find it has a cleaner flavor if you render it for a little bit less time, but low heat is definitely the key. So again, that's why I like to typically do it on the stovetop, just because I can kind of control that heat a little bit better. So I'm straining that off into some quart-sized jars, and you'll see later in the video as the lard starts to cool, I have some that are more of a pure white and then some that are a little bit darker, which is totally fine. They do have a little bit more flavor to them, and that really doesn't bother me when I'm using it in cooking. We're typically using it in a savory application where it doesn't really matter. But if you're wanting a really clean flavored lard, on the stovetop over super low heat is the way to go. I do have a more detailed video of rendering lard from, I think, last year that I can share in the description box down below. Once those bones were out of the oven, I just got that onto the stovetop, topped it off with water. And for this batch, I am adding in some onion. I had a few super small ones from the garden, so those went straight in there, along with some carrots and carrot tops. I also like to add in some fresh garlic as well. I don't always season my broth. I often do absolutely no seasoning, just so it's super versatile. I can use it in a multitude of ways, but I like to have a variety on our pantry shelf. That got brought up to a boil, and then I just reduced the heat down to low, covered it, and I let that go overnight, and in the morning got that strained off to can. Now, if you're really particular about getting any fat off before canning, you can either use like a fat separator when you're filling the jars, or you can cool the broth, scoop off any fat from the top, and then reheat it before processing. I just do my best to skim off as much as I can. I'm not super picky about it, but that just helps to get a good seal. I can my broth in quart-sized jars. That is the size that we typically do, but you could definitely do this in pints. So I've got clean, hot jars. You don't need to sterilize when you're pressure canning. So I'm getting my jars filled to 1 inch of headspace. I do find with broth, or really anything that has some sort of fat in it, that it's really helpful to clean off the rims of the jars really well with some white vinegar. That just really helps to make sure that you get a good seal in the jars. Adding lids and rings to fingertip tight, and then these are ready for the pressure canner. I use a Presto 23 quart, so I add in 3 quarts of water. That's what my model calls for. Pressure canning felt so intimidating when I first started doing it, but it's such a great way to add versatility into what you're able to preserve for your canning pantry, and I find that our pressure canned goods are what we use the most. For quart jars, I'm going to process for 25 minutes. You could also can the broth in pints, and you would just process for 20. This weekend really was a kind of random compilation of a bunch of things that I needed to get done that have been sitting on my to-do list for a while. And I really like to make my own personal care products, cleaning products, and something that my husband has been out of for quite a while is Aftershave. So I made him up a couple bottles of that. This is super simple. You can use either isopropyl alcohol or vodka, as well as witch hazel. Some people like to do more witch hazel, less alcohol, or even just entirely witch hazel. He does like there to be some alcohol in it. So I'm using isopropyl alcohol, the witch hazel, and also a little bit of vegetable glycerin. You really don't need a whole lot for this. And then you can scent it with essential oils if you'd like. Again, when I get busy, my canning room starts to become a dumping ground for everything. I'll just get it out of the kitchen. I really don't like to have clutter around. It stresses me out. So just to get those jars out of the way, they get piled in boxes in the canning room instead of just being transferred onto the shelf, which really does not take a whole lot of time. And then it turns into a project. So today was the day to tackle it and kind of rotate what we have in the canning room, take stock of what needs to get used up, make sure that the seals are looking good on everything, and getting all of this year's canning shelved. This year I have definitely been doing a lot less preserving than I typically do. I just have not had as much time this year to spend on it. But luckily we still have lots left over from last year. So that's a great thing. If you've got the time to can it, do as much as you can because it's gonna last longer than a year. I'm just now getting into tomato preserving season. I have some pizza sauce that we got done last week and a lot more that needs to be done. Definitely need to restock on some of my roasted tomato salsa. I think that's going to be a project for this upcoming weekend. And I also want to do a lot more tomato sauce this year. Last year we actually ran out, so I didn't quite plan out my tomato products perfectly last year. So we're gonna do less diced tomatoes and more sauce as we have those coming in. That wraps up today's video. Thank you so much for joining me as I tackle some random things on my to-do list that I have been meaning to get done, and I will see you in the next video.